Hi and welcome to video number 7, or actually it's number 8, but video 7 in terms of topic or subject. And in this topic today, or subject, I'm going to be covering this chip paint effect that you can create using PBR Painter in Blender. It's a rip-off of a Substance Painter look that I saw, and I thought that would be interesting to see if we could replicate it. I even made a similar sort of sphere for it to go on. So without further ado, let's get started. So for the purposes of this tutorial, I've just created this Substance Painter type sphere, which helps to show the crevices and the edges, the cavities and the edges, as probably as good as you can in any sort of non-definable object. So without further ado, let's get started. Oh, just to mention again, UV map, it's always worth having a fairly decent UV map, if not for actually texturing, then for baking at the ends. So on to texture paint, set up material for PBR, set our first layer, and we'll call this bronze base. And we will add a bronze PBR setup to it and fill it just so we can see it. Occasionally, I don't know if this happens to you, but I get some unfilled parts there. There we go, there's our brass looking pretty good. I could do with a bit more detail, so we'll make it twice the detail, half the height, or half the distance and height, whatever you call it. So before I go on, what I want to do now is I just want to create a little bit of a worn edge on the kind of rims on the edges here, just to help sell the effect of the kind of flaking paint. So back to our layers, and we'll create a new layer, call this worn bronze edges. Okay, I'm just going to use the colour actually, because that's really the only thing that's going to change on here. And the colour I've got there actually is, I did this before, it's probably about the right colour. It's just a lighter version of what we've already got, so I'll leave it as it is. So add a new mask, Ambient Occlusion, and preview selected mask on mesh. Click over to cycles, which is active, and we've got a few extras now in this latest version of PBR Painter, which really help to create the mask for just the edges of your object, your mesh. And if we click inside AO and change our AO distance to something quite small, in this case 0.05, you'll see that it gives a really nice, just a simple edge here. The other option you could use, and it's worth just showing this, I found, is the geometric mask. And there are two options, a bevel version and curvature simple. So you've got curvature simple, curvature bevel. Curvature simple basically uses the pointiness of an object, which basically means that the higher the mesh density is, the more accurate that will be. And in this particular mesh, oh, and by the way, it will actually it makes a difference if you've got a higher subdivision level here as well, which will depend on how good this other mask looks like, this geometric mask. So for example, if I go to the bevel mask, it doesn't depend on that at all. It simply depends on the radius of the bevel and the bevel samples, and of course the brightness and contrast here. And it does a fairly good job, but you'll notice that if you've already got a slight bevel on your edge, you do get some discrepancy. You don't get a full kind of whiteness across the edge, which for me doesn't always work so well. But in this case, the simple curvature does quite a nice job, because it's quite a high geometry mesh in terms of the subdivision, and if we squeeze the blacks and the whites, you'll see I get something quite similar to what I had on the ambient occlusion. I mean, it's actually very clean and actually looks quite nice. So that's giving me quite a nice smooth look. So let's compare that one with this one here, and they're not dissimilar at all. But of course, the ambient occlusion, because of it's using the samples method, it basically is a bit noisier. But either or will do. Let me just have a quick comparison, and I'll see which one I want to use. I think I'll go with this one because it looks like it's doing quite a good job. So I'm going to bake that one down. Actually, before I do that, I might as well just do add a procedural as well and do the whole thing in cycles, and then I can just bake one mask. Let's preview that down. Preview that. Actually, we just want a bit of variation in our edges without too much contrast. So we preview a whole lot now, and we're looking for something like that actually, where the whites are pretty similar. And once we've done that, the mask stack color ramp, we can wind the whole thing up and get just that edge where look. I think something like that will do. We can always come back and redo this if necessary, and so we will just bake those down. We're going to do it fairly high resolution because we're going to be getting quite close, so I won't go any less than 8 for these masks today, and we'll call this edge mask 1. Okay. And there's our mask, and we can see it's in cycles as well, and that's kind of what I was looking for. And if we look at that now with our worn edges, we'll just need to paint it as opposed to erase it. So there we go. So now we can see our edges. I whacked the mask multiplier up a little bit just so you can see what we're looking for here. And I quite like that. I even don't mind the kind of noise at the top there, sort of adds something. And it just gives you that feeling of where that you would get close to the edges. So now we've got that, we'll actually create our paint layer. So new layer, paint, and we'll just use a base color of red. Do a procedural. And so we'll just change these blacks and whites to a version of red, dark version, and a light version, light-ish version. Okay, and we'll fill that layer. And at the moment it's keeping all the other attributes from the previous layers, metallic, etc. So the first thing we want to do is get rid of the metallic. So just for now we'll make that constant, so there's no metallic on the paint at all. But we'll add a roughness map to it, and I downloaded a paint texture from Ambient CG, but I'm just going to use the actual texture from the roughness. So and there we've got the paint layer, the paint roughness. Now there is a seam here where you can see the paint is crossing over from paint's texture is crossing over from one UV to the next. So in this case it's probably worth using a different texture mapping type like box, but I'll come back to that. I'll just leave it like that for now. I think it'll be fine. I just want to demonstrate the actual edge chipping of the paint more than anything else, so we'll leave that as it is. Maybe it's a bit, maybe bring that down a bit. Okay, good. So now we need to create an edge chipping of the paint here to sell us the idea that there's actual paint on top of brass. So to do that we will create a mask, and it's going to be an image texture. We're actually going to make a new image texture. Go OK, go new, and actually going to make this 8K. You can hear a baby crying. It's because we've got a baby and he's learning to walk and he's falling down a lot. And let's call this paint chips, paint flakes. There you go, that's pretty better. Okay, and just save as number 2. And the first thing we're going to do is going to paint the mask here, but we're actually going to fill it initially, making sure, let's just have a quick check of our brush settings. On fill, that all looks okay, so click to fill it. Okay, so I was never quite sure actually, but now I've just confirmed it. So your base color for my let's just turn this off for a second. I had a procedural mask for my paint. As you can see, I've got this kind of nice patchy red, but prior to that my painted option was that yellow, which meant if we convert that to grey, then essentially what was happening was when I was painting my mask here and filling it, I was getting a non-white colour, whereas if I paint with my paintbrush, for some reason it's coming white, but I want it to be white on my fill. So with fill selected under my paint mode, I have to make sure that they are all set to white, I can now change that back to procedural and not worry. And now when I click fill, I get a nice white, and what that means is essentially that you shouldn't see any difference here when I click that mask, because everything's white, so it's completely see-through. So now what I'm going to do is make some of the parts not see-through, and to do that I actually made a mask which looks like this. So it's an image I took from this website here, Texture Palace, and took it into Photoshop and kind of edited it and made a longer version of it, and it seems to work quite well for what I need it to do. So the way we now do that is we're going to paint on this same mask, but instead of using the fill tool we're going to use the paintbrush, and in the paintbrush settings we make sure we're on paintbrush, which we are, and then we use a brush texture. We have to create a new one, and we want it on stencil, which it's on, and we're going to load that particular image. And here we go, here's what it looks like. And to move it around we use the right mouse button, to rotate it the control button here, and to zoom it the right mouse button with the shift down button down. So let's set this up where I want it to be set up. I've made it quite big, this mask, on purpose, so that I can kind of cover a wide area. And what we want to do is create like a line here where the paint is just starting to chip away. Not just starting, but is starting to chip away. So set it somewhere like this and start painting like so, and you can see how it's starting to look. Let's make my brush a bit smaller. And so what I'm going to do is now I'm going to speed up the whole process and do this same mask all over to create this kind of nice chipped effect. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it there, and for the rest of it I'm just going to add another mask just to get into the crevices here. I'm started painting them here, but I think there's a better way of doing that. So we will add mask. Let's stop painting and save it. Add mask. Let's do a ambient occlusion. To cycles. Let's preview that mask on the mesh for a moment. And let's change the distance. Whoops, the slide is very 0.05. Doesn't want me to pull there. There we go. Okay, so basically I want to keep this paint here. So I'm just going to bake that visible mask. Call this AO extra. And back to cycles. Let's oops. Okay, let's just preview the mask on the mesh. So essentially what we've got is we've got this mask here, and I want to make the ambient occlusion black. As opposed to white, so I should be able to just swap these over like so, and stick that on top of the other one, multiply it, blend factor with 1, that's pretty good. I might even be able to use an edge mask although I feel that if I used an edge mask I might occasionally, there are bits I want to keep a bit of paint on the edges. Okay, let's try that. Let's try it just for the sake of having an extra edge mask on there. So let's go, we'll do ambient occlusion again. Okay, preview selected mask on mesh, pop over to cycles, and I want inside 0.005, and I just want to lose the top of that there, which I can easily do once I've baked these down, but just make these a tiny bit tighter. Okay, that will do. Let's bake that one. Make sure I turn these two off. Done that before, and it bakes the whole lot here. It says merge visible masks, so the ones you don't want to merge, just make sure they're not on. For this edge extra 1, 8K, okay, so let's just quickly preview that mask on the mesh. Oops, not that one, that one. And we're just going to paint the little bit of the top out, which I didn't want. Do you know what, we might not we might be okay with that. Let's just stick it to the top. Let's multiply it. Oh, I need to flip the colours. Okay, and that should have just given us. Okay, what's going on? Okay, so we're almost there. So all I've got is a bit of paint on the top of here, which I just want to remove, and to do that we'll go back to my original mask, paint flakes. Let's rename that paint flakes mask, and back to paint mask, and actually prefer to do it on the actual object. Probably wouldn't hurt to leave a little bit of paint on there, would it? Like that. As long as they don't look like they've been done with a brush. At this point we're almost there. I'm just going to compress all these masks down and add a normal. Actually, let's just do the normal right now. So if we do normal and we do the link to mask, and so at this point you could live with that, and if you've not got a texture editor like Photoshop, I would suggest leaving it there. But there is an added extra you can do to create a kind of bumpiness on the edges of this, and so what I'm going to do now is going to switch over to Photoshop and just do that. So here we are in Photoshop, and it's quite a large image and my computer's not the best in the world, so things might get a little bit slow in here, but essentially what we need to do is we need to create a white edge here with a slightly grayer inside, so that when we use this as a normal matte it'll be slightly raised on the outside and not so much on the inside. So to do that, if I hold the control and down and select any one of the channels here, it will select the actual white we've got here, and so create a new layer, and going to just modify the selection by contracting it just a couple of pixels. Probably less than that actually. Let's go 2 pixels. And let's feather that by say 4, and then let's fill that with white. make sure that it's filled, which it is, and then let's just do another layer and fill it with a slightly off grey, slightly off white. Okay, that's kind of the thing I was looking for. So it's slightly raised on the outside, except I've done it wrong, haven't I? This needs to be this needs to be white. Whoops. Start that there again. And this one here, which is the one inside, needs to be a slightly off white. There we go. So it's brighter on the edges, and just to finish off, let's just cut off. Actually, that should be fine like it is. The only thing that's going to happen is on the edges here, I'm going to get a slight raised bump, so my UV map, but I'll come back and fix that in a moment. So let's just save that as soft. And back in here, rather than have link to mask, we'll do texture, and we'll import that one we've just done, soft one, and click use bump, and you can see already straight away what's happening. It's way too much, but if we just take it right down to something like that, and there we go, you can see the flakiness is much more exaggerated. Probably don't even want that much, something like that, and it's starting to look a lot better. Now the only thing is the UV line isn't really showing up like I thought it would, but it's almost there. It could do with a little bit of darkness around the edges of the paint, almost as if it's casting a shadow. So essentially we could try, this is extra now, so let's call this edge dark for want of a better. Let's make that black. Let's fill that. That should make everything black there. So essentially what we want is just a slight edge of blackness on there. So if we use the same mask, as the original, what did I call it? Master Flakes. So you can see it's masking the paint, so we're not actually seeing. Oh, I don't know actually. Yeah, so it's just slightly adding it, but we need a little bit more. Let's see if we can squeeze these the other way. There we go. Okay, and I think I'm going to call it a day there. And so here is the final look, as it were. Let's add Ambient Occlusion, screen place reflections. Just add a little bit of something extra to it, and it doesn't look half bad at all. I just, so you know, I did try doing one with just the standard edge tools, you know, with the noise, etc. And whilst it got a fairly decent look, it didn't really give the same sort of believability of chip paints that you get with this kind of texture here. So if anyone knows of a way to create this procedurally in Blender, then do give me a shout. So I'll leave it there. Thanks for listening, take care, and God bless.